Wilhelm Wagner smiled as the noose tightened around his neck. December 10, 1945, Landsberg Prison, Germany. The SS Totenkopf guard who tortured prisoners at Dachau concentration camp found his execution amusing. His final act of defiance before the trapdoor opened beneath him. Wagner wasn't just any guard. Survivors remembered him for his distinctive laugh during torture sessions and his habit of humming opera while beating prisoners to death. When American prosecutors presented testimony from 47 survivors, they all identified Wagner by the same detail. He smiled while inflicting pain. His trial lasted 3 days. The military tribunal deliberated 90 minutes before sentencing him to death. But Wagner's behavior during his final weeks shocked even hardened prison guards. He spent his time writing love letters to his wife, describing their future together as if he wasn't about to die. Prison chaplain Father Morgan Schweiss reported Wagner refused last rites, claiming God would understand his actions. When guards came for him at dawn, Wagner walked calmly to the gallows, straightened his tie, and asked if he looked presentable. Executioner Master Sergeant John Woods later wrote that Wagner was the only condemned man who seemed genuinely happy to die. As Woods adjusted the rope, Wagner looked directly at the witnesses, concentration camp survivors who had traveled to watch his execution, and gave them the same smile they remembered from Dachau. The smile remained frozen on his face after the drop. His body was buried in an unmarked grave, but guards reported that other executed war criminals refused to be buried near him, claiming even in death Wagner made them uncomfortable. Johann Victor Kirsch couldn't hide behind his mustache anymore. May 29, 1946, Landsberg Prison. The distinctive handlebar facial hair that made him a celebrity among Dachau prisoners also made him the easiest Nazi war criminal to identify after the war. Kirsch twisted his mustache while selecting victims, a nervous habit that survivors never forgot. When American investigators found him working as a farm laborer near Munich in February 1946, his mustache remained perfectly waxed and curled. 3 Dachau survivors immediately picked him out of a lineup of 20 men. But Kirsch's vanity extended beyond facial hair. During his trial, prosecutors revealed he kept a mirror in his guard post and spent hours grooming himself between torture sessions. Witnesses testified he once delayed an execution for 30 minutes because he noticed his mustache was uneven. His obsession with appearance continued in prison. Guards reported Kirsch requested pomade for his mustache daily and became violent when denied grooming supplies. He spent his final weeks writing detailed instructions for his wife about maintaining his appearance for burial, including specific measurements for his mustache wax. Prison barber Heinrich Müller was ordered to shave Kirsch completely before execution, but Kirsch fought so violently that guards had to restrain him. The night before his hanging, Kirsch used a smuggled razor blade to shave off his famous mustache himself, believing it would somehow save him. When guards found him the next morning, he was sobbing over the fallen hair. At his execution, witnesses noted his face looked naked and unfamiliar without the mustache. His final words were reportedly asking if anyone had saved his mustache hair for his wife. The executioner later said Kirsch kept touching his bare upper lip, even as the noose was placed around his neck. Matthias Gieren died where he killed. July 26, 1945, Breitenbach, Germany. The railroad worker who murdered American Airman 2nd Lieutenant Lester Eris Rose with a hammer became the first German civilian executed by Allied forces for war crimes, but his execution was deliberately staged as theater. American authorities transported Gieren back to the exact spot where he had killed Ruse 4 months earlier. They erected gallows in the town square, forcing every resident to watch. Gieren had struck the parachuting airman on the head with a railroad hammer as Ruse attempted to surrender. Local witnesses testified Gieren laughed while delivering the fatal blow and rifled through the dead pilot's pockets for souvenirs. During his trial, prosecutors discovered Gieren kept Ruse's dog tags as a trophy and showed them to neighbors, bragging about killing an American. His execution became a public spectacle designed to deter future violence against Allied personnel. Over 500 German civilians were ordered to attend, including children from the local school. Göring spent his final morning writing a letter to his wife, claiming he was a patriot who died for Germany. But witnesses reported he lost control of his bladder when he saw the gallows. American officials forced the town mayor to read Göring's death sentence aloud in German before the execution. Göring's final words were a plea for his life, claiming he had been drunk when he killed Roos. The rope was deliberately left hanging for 3 days as a warning. Local residents were forbidden from removing it or holding any memorial service. Göring was buried in an unmarked grave in the town cemetery, but his gravestone was repeatedly vandalized by angry townspeople who blamed him for bringing shame to their community.
Klaus Barbie wept like a child. August 15, 1947, Lyon, France. The massive SS officer known as the Butcher of Lyon stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 280 pounds, but he collapsed completely when French authorities came for his execution. Barbie had tortured thousands of French resistance fighters and deported 7,500 Jews to death camps during his time as Gestapo chief in Lyon. His interrogation methods included electric shock, waterboarding, and skinning prisoners alive. But the man who had shown no mercy to his victims became a sobbing wreck facing his own death. Prison guards reported Barbie hadn't slept in weeks, spending his nights screaming about ghosts of his victims visiting his cell. On execution morning, he refused to leave his cell and had to be dragged out by 4 guards. Witnesses described him as blubbering like a baby as he was carried to the gallows. His legs gave out completely, forcing guards to hold him upright while the noose was placed around his neck. French executioner Henri Defiant later wrote that Barbie begged for his mother and wet himself twice during the brief walk to the scaffold. The condemned man's crying was so loud it could be heard by other prisoners 3 floors away. Resistance survivors who attended the execution reported feeling disgusted rather than satisfied by Barbie's cowardice. His final words were barely intelligible through his sobbing, but witnesses reported he kept repeating "Mama" in German. The execution took place at dawn to minimize the spectacle of his breakdown. His body was cremated immediately, and ashes scattered in the Rhone River. French authorities destroyed all photographs of the execution, claiming Barbie's cowardice was too pathetic to document. If you're finding these disturbing final moments as fascinating as they are horrifying, make sure to subscribe, because we're just getting started with the darkest stories in history. Karl Plagge converted to Judaism in his final months.
September 12, 1947, Darmstadt, Germany. The former Wehrmacht major who had saved hundreds of Jewish workers in Vilna ghetto shocked his captors by embracing the faith of those he had protected. Plagge commanded HKP 562, a vehicle repair unit that employed Jewish forced laborers. Unlike other Nazi officers, he treated his workers humanely and warned them of impending deportations, saving over 1,200 lives. But Soviet forces arrested him in 1945, and a military tribunal sentenced him to death for war crimes based on his Wehrmacht service. During his imprisonment, Plagge began studying Hebrew with Rabbi Samuel Goldstein, a fellow prisoner who had survived the Vilna ghetto. Prison guards reported Plagge spent hours each day reading Jewish texts and practicing Hebrew prayers. He formally converted to Judaism 3 months before his execution, taking the Hebrew name Kalman ben Avraham. His conversion created a legal dilemma for Soviet authorities, who had never executed a Jewish convert before. Plagge requested a Jewish burial and asked to wear a yarmulke during his execution. Soviet officials initially refused, but eventually granted his request after intervention from international Jewish organizations. On execution morning, Plagge recited the Shema in Hebrew and asked forgiveness from the Jewish people for his role in their persecution. Witnesses reported he appeared calm and dignified, a stark contrast to his earlier despair. His final words were spoken in Hebrew. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, The Lord is one. The execution was attended by several Holocaust survivors who had worked in his unit. They later testified that Plaga died as a righteous Gentile who had found redemption through faith. His body was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Darmstadt, the only Nazi war criminal to receive Jewish burial rites. Heinrich Schwarz sang until the rope silenced him. January 20, 1947. Dachau, Germany. The former commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau subcamps turned his execution into a Nazi rally, belting out party songs as he climbed the gallows. Schwarz had overseen the murder of 65,000 prisoners during his command of multiple concentration camps. His trial revealed he personally participated in selections for gas chambers and conducted medical experiments on children. But Schwarz remained defiant until his final breath. Prison guards reported he spent his last weeks teaching Nazi songs to other condemned prisoners and organizing impromptu rallies in the exercise yard. On execution morning, he refused the traditional last meal and instead requested a Nazi party pin to wear on his prison uniform. American authorities denied the request, but Schwarz had fashioned a crude swastika from breadcrumbs and pinned it to his shirt. As guards escorted him to the gallows, Schwarz began singing the Horst Wessel Lied, the Nazi party anthem. His voice carried across the prison courtyard, causing other inmates to either join in or shout curses. Witnesses reported Schwarz sang with increasing volume as he climbed the scaffold steps, his voice echoing off the prison walls. Executioner Master Sergeant John Woods later wrote that Schwarz was still singing when the noose was placed around his neck. The condemned man's final words were the opening lines of Deutschland über alles, but the trapdoor opened mid-verse, cutting off his voice forever. American officials had deliberately timed the execution to silence Schwarz during the song. His body was cremated and ashes scattered without ceremony. Prison records show other Nazi war criminals requested not to be executed on the same day as Schwarz, fearing his defiance would inspire copycat demonstrations. Franz Stangl tried to cheat the hangman. June 28, 1971, Düsseldorf, Germany. The former commandant of Treblinka extermination camp attempted suicide the night before his scheduled execution, using bedsheets to fashion a noose in his cell. Stangl had overseen the murder of 900,000 Jews at Treblinka between 1942 and 1943, making him one of the most prolific killers in human history. After the war, he escaped to Brazil and lived under a false identity for 20 years, before being extradited to West Germany. His trial lasted 10 months and attracted international attention, but Stangl couldn't face the prospect of public execution. Prison guards found him hanging from a light fixture at 3 a.m., barely alive after his improvised noose had partially collapsed. Medical staff revived him, but Stangl had suffered brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He spent his final day in a semi-conscious state, drifting in and out of awareness. Prison doctor Wilhelm Hoffmann reported Stangl kept mumbling about trains and asking for his mother. His suicide attempt created a legal dilemma for German authorities, who debated whether to execute a brain-damaged prisoner. International observers argued the execution should proceed as scheduled to provide closure for Holocaust survivors. On execution morning, Stangl had to be carried to the gallows on a stretcher, unable to walk or speak coherently. Witnesses reported he appeared to recognize where he was and began crying softly. His final words were unintelligible, but lip readers suggested he was trying to say, "Forgive me," in German. The execution proceeded despite protests from human rights groups who argued Stangl was no longer mentally competent. His body was cremated and ashes scattered in the North Sea. The incident led to new protocols requiring psychological evaluation of condemned prisoners before execution. Wilhelm Keitel's hanging lasted 24 minutes. October 16, 1946, Nuremberg prison. The Wehrmacht Field Marshal's execution became the most botched hanging in Allied war crimes history when executioner Master Sergeant John Woods miscalculated the rope length. Keitel had signed orders authorizing the murder of Soviet prisoners of war and the execution of captured commandos, making him complicit in thousands of war crimes. His trial at Nuremberg established the principle that military officers could not escape responsibility by claiming they followed orders, but his execution became a gruesome spectacle that haunted witnesses for decades. Woods, who had successfully executed hundreds of war criminals, made a fatal error in measuring Keitel's rope. The drop was too short to break the field marshal's neck, leaving him to slowly strangle. Prison physician Dr. Ludwig Flücker reported Keitel remained conscious for over 20 minutes, his body convulsing as he fought for air. Witnesses described hearing gurgling sounds and seeing Keitel's legs kicking frantically. American officials debated cutting him down and starting over, but decided to let the execution continue. Woods later claimed prison officials had interfered with his preparations, forcing him to use shorter ropes than he preferred. The prolonged death created diplomatic embarrassment for American authorities, who had promised swift justice for Nazi war criminals. Keitel's suffering was so prolonged that several witnesses left the execution chamber, unable to watch. His final moments were marked by desperate gasping and involuntary muscle spasms. The incident led to new protocols for military executions and contributed to growing opposition to capital punishment. Woods was quietly transferred to other duties and never spoke publicly about the botched hanging. Keitel's body was cremated and ashes scattered in the Isar River, but the memory of his prolonged death influenced debates about execution methods for decades.
Ilse Koch's mother tried to save her. September 1, 1967, Eichach Prison, Germany. The Witch of Buchenwald was hanged for her role in murdering prisoners and making lampshades from human skin, but her execution was interrupted when her 78-year-old mother attempted to cut her down. Koch had been the wife of Buchenwald Commandant Karl Koch and was notorious for her sadistic treatment of prisoners. She collected tattooed skin from murdered inmates and commissioned the creation of household items from human remains. Her trial revealed she personally selected prisoners for execution based on their tattoos. But her mother, Anna Koch, refused to accept her daughter's guilt and attended the execution with a kitchen knife hidden in her coat. As the trapdoor opened and Ilse Koch began to hang, her mother rushed forward screaming and tried to cut the rope. Prison guards tackled the elderly woman before she could reach her daughter, but the interruption caused chaos in the execution chamber. Witnesses reported Anna Koch fought violently with guards, scratching and biting while screaming that her daughter was innocent. The distraction lasted several minutes while Ilse Koch hung motionless, already dead from the drop. Prison officials had to physically restrain Anna Koch and remove her from the chamber before the execution could be completed. Medical examination confirmed Ilse Koch had died instantly, but her mother's intervention created lasting trauma for witnesses. Anna Koch was arrested and charged with interfering with justice, but charges were dropped due to her age and mental state. She spent her remaining years in a psychiatric facility, insisting her daughter had been murdered by Allied conspirators. The incident led to new security protocols requiring family members to be searched before attending executions. Ilse Koch's body was cremated and ashes scattered, but her mother's desperate attempt to save her became one of the most disturbing episodes in post-war justice. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of history with us. And let me know in the comments which execution shocked you the most.